The mission was supposed to be clean. 3 days in. Tag the weapons cache. Burn the coordinates to the relay. Get out at grid 7 before the extraction window closed at 0400. 6 bodies in, 6 bodies out. Simple enough that Colbriggs had stopped triple-checking his sidearm charge 2 days ago, which was either a sign he was comfortable or a sign he was getting sloppy, and he hadn't decided which. The jungle on Verith 9 didn't care either way. It was the kind of planet that looked beautiful from orbit and felt like a bad decision the second you were inside it. 4 layers of canopy so thick that daylight hit the ground floor in thin yellow slices, like someone was trying to ration it. The air smelled like wet copper and something else underneath that nobody had ever successfully named. The ground cover bioluminesced at night, soft blue and green pulses running through the root systems, and it would have been pretty if it didn't also mean that anything moving through the dark was lit up from below like a walking target. Nora Cade had been moving through it for 3 days, and she had stopped noticing the pretty part somewhere around hour 6 of day 1. She was built like someone who'd grown up hauling things, not tall, not heavy, just put together in a way that suggested she'd never once done anything halfway. Her pack was standard issue plus 14 things she'd added herself, a habit her squad lead back at Basic had called a liability, and that had since saved her life in various configurations 4 times. She kept count. Cole was 6 meters ahead of her on the ridge trail, hand signaling the pace. The 2 Vorkai on point, Z on the left flank, 1 called Braith on the right, moved the way the Vorkai always moved, which was like something that had never once in its evolutionary history had a reason to hurry and had therefore never learned to look like it was hurrying even when it was. Long legs. Quiet feet. The secondary eyelids half-closed against the canopy debris that drifted down whenever the upper branches moved. The ambush came from above. That was the part nobody planned for. Not because it was unlikely, because the Vorkai hostile faction in this sector had been pulling canopy drops for 2 months and every brief mentioned it, but because knowing a thing and having your body ready for it are 2 separate problems, and the body always loses the argument when the first shot comes in hot from 12 meters up. 2 minutes. It felt like longer. It always did. Braith went down in the first exchange. Not dead. Nora clocked the rise and fall of the chest as she moved, but down and staying there, which in the math of the next 90 seconds meant the same thing. Cole was calling positions on comms, his voice doing that flat, clip thing it did when he was working, not panicking. Colbriggs had a lot of qualities Nora could take or leave, but she had never once seen him panic, and she respected that even when she didn't like him. She was already running. The ridge narrowed ahead and she was taking the fast line, the one that cut through the gap between 2 root clusters the size of small buildings, and she was 3 strides into the gap when the ground on the other side simply wasn't where the ground was supposed to be. The ravine wasn't on any map they'd been given. This would later be filed as an intelligence failure. For now it was just the sound of her own voice making a short, sharp sound that wasn't a word, and then the impact, and then the specific white-hot clarity that only comes when a bone breaks. She heard the snap before she felt it. Fibula. Left leg. She knew because she had reset enough field fractures to recognize the grammar of it. The sound first, dense, and wrong, and then the feeling arriving 1 full second later like it had stopped to collect itself. Compound. Not clean. She lay at the bottom of the ravine for approximately 4 seconds. Then she keyed her comms. Briggs, her voice was level. She was proud of that. Cade. He was already breathing differently. She could hear it. I'm in a ravine. Grid offset from trail marker 4, maybe 8 meters down. Left leg is broken. Compound. The silence on the other end lasted 9 seconds. She counted. How bad? Bad enough that I'm telling you about it. Another pause. Shorter. She heard him moving, heard the shift in background sound that meant he was stepping away from the group. When he came back, his voice was still flat. Still working. Cade. Extraction window is fixed. You're 4 clicks out and immobile. The math doesn't work. She looked up at the ravine walls. The bioluminescence was doing its thing down here too. Soft green light running along the root systems like something breathing slow. Run it again, she said. We can't. She didn't say anything. On the open channel she could hear the others, the 2 remaining Vorkai, the other human on the team, a quiet, careful man named Lou Garrett who never said more than 12 words in a row, and she could hear that none of them were talking either. Then Z's voice, low and careful. Not to her. Not to Cole. Just an exhale. The kind of sound you make when you've already lost the argument with yourself and you know it. Cade. Cole again. I'm sorry. She almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because sorry was such a small word for such a large piece of math. Don't be dramatic about it, she said. Go. The comms went quiet in the specific way they go quiet when people are still listening but have nothing left to say. She heard them move. She gave it 30 seconds. She sat in the green light at the bottom of an unmapped ravine on a dying jungle planet with a broken leg, and she gave herself 30 seconds to hold the full weight of what had just happened, and then she put it down. She pulled her field compass out of her chest pocket. It was a battered thing. Older than it had any right to be. The face was scratched. One hinge had a hairline crack that she'd wrapped in electrical tape 3 deployments ago and never properly fixed. She tapped it twice against her knee, her good knee, the way she always did when she was about to do something she'd already decided on and was just waiting for the rest of herself to catch up. Well, she said, to the compass, to the ravine, to nobody in particular. Isn't that something? She started moving. The first thing she did was inventory. Pack stripped to essentials, field kit, sidearm, 3 ration bars she didn't plan to eat until she had a reason to celebrate, and the compass. Everything else she left at the bottom of the ravine like a small, organized goodbye. The second thing she did was build a brace. Her TAC kit had a folding wrist stabilizer, rated for soft tissue support, absolutely not rated for full structural load bearing on a fractured lower leg. She stared at it for a moment. Then she looked around the ravine floor until she found 2 pieces of bark the right width and density, bit them to the shape she needed, and started working. It took 11 minutes. It was not comfortable. It would do. She got her good leg under her, put weight on the brace in a way that made her vision go briefly white at the edges, and stood up. 4 kilometers. Jungle terrain. 1 working leg. She didn't think about the math. The math had already made its call. She was making a different one. She started moving. The first click was the worst. Not because of the terrain. Not because of what was in the jungle around her. Because her body was still arguing with her about what had happened to it, sending up complaints through every nerve channel it had, and she had to keep making the same decision over and over again, every time her left foot touched ground. Yes, we are doing this. Yes, still. Yes, again. No, we are not stopping. The brace held. Barely. It was doing something it was never designed to do, and it knew it, creaking slightly with each step like it was registering a formal objection. She had wrapped it tight enough that the blood flow to her lower leg was doing something she didn't want to think about too hard. She'd deal with that on the ship. If there was a ship. She stopped thinking about the ship. The jungle floor on Verith 9 was not flat. It was never flat. It was a constant negotiation of root systems as thick as a torso, soft ground that looked solid until it swallowed your foot to the ankle, and the occasional shelf of dark stone that the bioluminescent ground cover grew over and hid until you were already stepping on it and discovering it was angled wrong. Under normal conditions, she moved through terrain like this on autopilot, the body doing its reading of the ground while the mind tracked threat patterns above. Her body was not on autopilot. Her body was in a screaming committee meeting about the left leg situation, and nothing else was getting done. So she slowed down. Not stopped. Just slowed. She picked every step the way you pick a word when the wrong one costs you, carefully, with full attention, committing only when she was sure. Her good leg took the weight. The brace leg touched down just long enough to keep her from falling before the good leg took over again. It was not walking. It was a negotiation that happened to result in forward motion. She had her compass in her left hand. She was not using it for navigation. She knew the direction. Grid 7 was north-northeast, and the canopy was thick enough to make the stars useless, but she'd been reading jungle growth patterns since Verith 9 briefing week, and the moss on Verith 9 grew toward the moisture gradient, not the light, and the moisture came in from the east ridge line, which meant she could read the root growth like a map if she needed to. She was holding the compass because it was something to hold. At the 1.2 click mark, she heard the Cathas. She heard them before she saw them, which was the only good version of that situation. They were behind and to the left, moving through the undergrowth in the low-crouched way they moved when they were tracking something they hadn't fully committed to yet. 6-limbed. Roughly the size of a large dog but longer, built for short sprints and the ambush grab, with a jaw structure that the Vorkai field manual had described, in what she assumed was a translation from something that had originally been more alarming, as terminally efficient. There were 2 of them. She did not run. She couldn't run. That was the simple version. The more accurate version was that running was not going to help her with two Cathas who had already picked up a trail and whose top speed on open ground was roughly 3 times what her best speed had been before her leg broke, and was currently somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 times what she was managing now. So she stopped moving. This was the part that took everything she had. Every piece of her body that was still operating on standard mammal firmware was screaming at her to move, to put distance between herself and the things behind her, to do something because standing still was the one thing prey did not do. Prey moved. Prey ran. Prey gave you a chase, and the Cathas was built for a chase. She stood still. She controlled her breathing. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. The field decompression rhythm she drilled until it was automatic, until she could run it even when her hands were shaking. She let her shoulders drop. She let her weight settle as evenly as she could between both legs, even the broken one, even though that cost her, because a creature that was not prey did not favor one side. She had read the Vorkai field manual on Cathas pack behavior during transit week on the Callaway, lying on her bunk with nothing else to do, and she had memorized it the way she memorized all field manuals, completely, without meaning to, the way some people can't help knowing the words to every song they've heard more than twice. The manual had 2 relevant pieces of information for this exact situation. The first was that Cathas hunted by threat assessment. They were apex predators in a jungle full of things that could hurt them, and they had evolved to be careful about which fights they picked. They assessed. They circled. They looked for the signals that said, easy. They looked for fear movement, pain movement, the frantic push of something that knew it was losing. The second was that Cathas had 6 limbs and she had 2, and 2-limbed creatures were not in their standard prey profile. They existed in the same category as the large stone lizards that lived on the Verith-9 eastern ridgeline, unfamiliar silhouette, unknown capability. The manual called this category assessment pause stimulus. She was betting her life on assessment pause stimulus. The 2 Cathas came around the root cluster to her left and stopped. They were close enough that she could see the secondary pupils in their eyes catching the ground cover's light. She could see the way their forward 2 limbs shifted when they stopped, testing weight, deciding. She did not look directly at them. She looked at a fixed point above their eye line, not a challenge, not a retreat, just the steady gaze of something that was not afraid and was not running and was not, apparently, particularly interested in them either. The one on the left made a sound. Low. A click at the back of the throat. The one on the right answered it. They stood there for 17 seconds. She counted every one. Then the one on the right took 1 step back. Then the left. Then they both turned, not fast, not scared, just the unhurried turn of something that had done its math and decided the answer wasn't interesting enough, and they moved back into the undergrowth and were gone. She waited 30 seconds before she moved again. Then she tapped the compass twice against her palm. Lord have mercy on the math, she said, very quietly. She kept moving. The second click was easier than the first. Not because anything had changed. The terrain was the same, the leg was the same, the brace was doing the same protesting, but because her body had apparently accepted the situation and decided that if they were doing this, then they were doing this, and had stopped spending energy on the argument. She found a rhythm. Not a good one. Not a fast one. But a rhythm, the kind that lets the body do the mechanical work while the mind steps back slightly and breathes. She thought about Lou Garrett. Quiet Lou, who had been on her left on the ridge when the ambush hit, who had looked back at her twice during the firefight in that checking way he had, not because he needed something from her, but just because that was how Lou moved through the world, making sure the people around him were still there. She wondered if he'd looked back when they left. She put it down. She thought about the compass instead. About the cracked hinge and the scratched face and the fact that the needle had been 2 degrees off since the drop on Kethra Station 8 months ago when she'd taken a fall in a drainage tunnel and landed on her chest pocket. 2 degrees wasn't much. 2 degrees was nothing if you corrected for it automatically, the way she did. She'd never gotten it fixed. She kept moving through the greenlit dark of the Verith-9 jungle floor, and she didn't look at the compass for direction, and she didn't look at it for comfort exactly either. Just held it, the metal warm from her body heat, the familiar weight of a broken thing that still worked. The third click was waiting for her. She went to meet it. Somewhere in the third click the pain stopped being an event and became a condition. That was how she thought about it. Not that it got better, because it didn't get better, but that her brain reclassified it the way you reclassify background noise after you've been somewhere loud for long enough. It was still there. It was just part of the environment now. She was living inside it instead of fighting it. The brace was doing something she tried not to look at directly. She'd checked it twice since the Cathas and it was still holding the line, still doing its impossible job, but the bark had started to shift inside the paracord wrap and she was compensating with her hip, which meant her lower back was getting the kind of opinion about the situation that she would have to deal with later, on the other side of this, assuming there was another side. There would be another side. She said it like a fact, not a wish, which was an important distinction. The jungle here was older. The root systems were bigger, some of them rising 3 and 4 meters off the ground before arching back down, creating these dark tunnels underneath that the ground cover didn't grow into, so she was moving through patches of true dark broken by stretches of blue-green light. It made the distance hard to judge. It made everything look both closer and further than it was at the same time. She talked to the compass. She'd started doing it somewhere around the 1.8 click mark and she'd decided not to be embarrassed about it. There was nobody here to be embarrassed in front of. And the alternative was silence, and the silence in the deep jungle on Verith 9 was the kind of silence that had weight to it, the kind that pressed in if you let it, and she was not going to let it. 3 down, she told the compass. 1 to go before the forward post. The compass did not respond. It never responded. That was not the point. You're being very calm about this, she said. I respect that. She stepped over a root and the brace leg came down wrong, just slightly, just a few degrees off the angle she'd been holding, and the pain spiked up through the reclassified background condition like a flare going off and she stopped walking and breathed through it for a count of 12. Both hands braced against a root that was chest high and warmed the way everything organic on Verith 9 was warm, slightly, like the whole planet ran a low fever. 12 counts. She started walking again. I need you to know, she said to the compass, that I am extremely irritated about all of this. Not at you. Situationally. The tree canopy above her moved in the low upper level wind and the light shifted and for a moment the whole jungle floor went a shade deeper blue and she could see, maybe 200 meters ahead, the edge of the Vorkai forward post. She stopped. The brief said the post was empty. The brief said this sector had been cleared 2 days ago, that the hostile Vorkai faction had pulled back to the northern ridge line after the relay station went down, and the forward post was listed as secure, which in field language meant assumed secure, which in actual language meant nobody had physically checked it since the intelligence came in. Nora Cade had been doing this long enough to have opinions about intelligence. She crouched behind the root, which cost her a specific and personal kind of pain that she catalogued and did not react to, and she watched the post. It was a Vorkai structure. They built low and wide, nothing that broke the canopy line, everything built into the existing terrain rather than imposed on it. 3 connected low shelters with the material they used that looked like compressed dark earth but was something else, something that didn't rot and didn't burn cleanly and that human field engineers had been trying to reverse engineer for 2 years. She could see the entrance gap in the near shelter and she could see, standing at it, the specific still posture of a Vorkai sentry. 1. She scanned. Found the second one at the corner of the far shelter, half hidden behind a brace root. Both armed. Hostile faction colors on the shoulder marking. A dark band with 2 lighter lines, which she'd memorized from the identification brief the way she'd memorized the field manual, completely and accidentally. She could not go around. The post was positioned specifically to eliminate the flanking options on this approach, built into a natural choke point between 2 root ridges that would take her too far off course and too far off the clock if she tried to navigate around them. She looked at the compass. I need you not to be dramatic about this, she told it. She thought about the Kathas. She thought about assessment pause stimulus. And then she thought about something else, the way she'd been moving for the last hour. The favored right side. The drag of the left leg, the pull through the hip, the slight forward lean that the pack weight caused and that she'd stopped correcting because correcting it cost more than it was worth at this point. The whole pattern of it, the way her body had been negotiating this terrain, the shape it made in the low light. The Kathas on Verith 9. The stone lizards on the eastern ridge line. Unfamiliar silhouette. Unknown capability. She put the compass in her pocket. She adjusted her pack so the weight shifted further forward. She let her left shoulder drop to where it naturally wanted to be. She let the brace leg drag the way it dragged, which was further out to the side than a standard walking gait, and she let the right side take the weight and roll with it the way she'd been rolling with it for 2 clicks. The whole thing made her look wrong. Wrong height, wrong weight distribution, wrong limb proportion in the low jungle light. Something large and low and moving at the specific unhurried pace of something that had 6 limbs and had evolved here and was not in a hurry because nothing in this jungle had ever given it a reason to be. Or that was what she was betting on. She came out from behind the root and she walked. Not fast. Not slow. The same pace she'd been holding for 2 clicks, which was the only pace she had. She didn't look at the sentries. She picked a line that passed 60 meters to the left of the near shelter and held it, and she moved through the blue-lit ground cover in her wrong-weighted, hip-led, drag-step pattern, and she didn't look and she didn't think about what happened if this was wrong, because thinking about that right now was not a tool she had access to. She heard one of the sentries make a sound. She kept walking. She heard the second one respond. A quick series of clicks, the kind that meant something she didn't know the translation of, but that had the rhythm of a question. A debate. She kept walking. At 150 meters, she was behind a root cluster and out of direct line of sight, and she stopped and stood very still and listened and heard nothing following her. 200 meters. Still nothing. She was shaking. She discovered this factually, looking at her hands, the compass back out of her pocket and held in fingers that were doing something she hadn't told them to do. She made a note of it. She would be shaking for a while. That was fine. She could shake and walk at the same time. 1 click, she said. The compass was warm in her palm. She went 0.0357. 3 minutes to window close. She could hear the ship. She hadn't heard it before. The jungle was too thick. The canopy 8 sound the way it 8 light. But at the half-click mark, something in the air changed, and she could feel it before she heard it. A low subsonic hum coming up through the ground into the soles of her boots. The Meridian-class shuttle had a particular engine signature at low idle, something between a vibration and a pressure, and she knew it the way she knew the sound of her own heartbeat. Not because she'd memorized the frequency, but because she'd lived inside it across 6 deployments and her body recognized it before her brain caught up. They were still there. She did not let herself feel anything about that yet. Feeling things about it would happen later, in a controlled environment, probably horizontal. She kept moving. The last half-click was open terrain. That was the cruelty of the extraction site. The Meridian class needed the clearing, needed the open sky, and the open sky meant no canopy to break the visual line, which meant that anything coming out of the jungle toward the ship was visible from a ship long before it arrived. She had known this when she started. She had chosen not to think about it until now. Now she had to think about it. The clearing was 60 meters wide, cut into the jungle at a natural low point where 2 root ridges came together and then dropped away. The bioluminescent ground cover ran right to the edge where the jungle stopped and then gave way to the pale grey-brown bare ground of the clearing. The ship sat at the center, ramp down, running lights making a gold-orange stripe along the hull. She could see the ramp from here. She could see Z at the bottom of the ramp, standing very still, facing the tree line. Not watching for threats. She knew the difference. She stepped out of the jungle. The ground in the clearing was hard-packed and uneven, the grass long since burned off by previous landing cycles, just bare ground with a few stones and the wind that came with open space after so long under the canopy. The wind hit her face and she realized she'd forgotten about wind. She'd been inside the jungle so long that open air felt wrong, too big, like stepping into a room with no ceiling and finding the sky had an opinion about it. She started across the clearing. What she did next was not technically a sprint. A sprint was a controlled action, a deliberate pushing of the body to maximum speed within a sustainable mechanical framework. What she did was different. What she did was make the decision to fall forward at the maximum rate her body would allow and then outrun the falling, her good leg pushing off, her body tilting past the point of balance, gravity doing the work her muscles were no longer able to contribute in a traditional sense, the brace leg swinging out and forward and catching just enough to correct the angle before the good leg came back and pushed again. It was not fast. In any measurable way, it was not fast at all. But it was everything she had and she spent it without looking at the account. Z saw her when she was 30 meters out. The Vorkai moved, not toward her, not away, just shifted into a different kind of stillness, the wait-forward stance that in Vorkai body language meant the brain was processing something and the body was getting ready to answer it. The secondary eyelids came up. Z's head turned back toward the ramp, then back to her, then back to the ramp. She heard voices inside the ship. She heard Cole's voice. She was 20 meters out. 15. 10. Z came off the ramp to meet her. She hit the ramp at a speed that was somewhere between running and controlled disaster, and Z caught her, both arms, wrapped around her before she went down, holding with the full body grip the Vorkai used for things they intended to keep, and they went down together anyway because physics had already made its decision, sliding across the deck plates in a tangle of limbs and pack straps and the compass, somehow, bouncing free of her pocket and ringing out a small metallic sound against the floor. Petra Dunn's voice from the cockpit, no preamble. Tell me that's her. It's her, Z said. Ramp, Petra said. The ramp came up. Nora lay on her back on the deck and watched the ceiling and listened to the engines change pitch, the low idle sharpening into something purposeful, and she felt the deck move under her as the ship lifted. The transition from ground to air happened in the way it always happened, a slight stomach drop, a shift in pressure, and then the smoothness that meant they were up and climbing and the canopy was below them. 0358. 1 minute past window. The math had been wrong. She was aware of people around her. She was aware of Cole's boots on the deck plates. She knew his walk, the specific weight of it, stopping near her, and she was aware of the other sounds, Lou's voice saying something she didn't catch, the 2 remaining Vorkai in the rear compartment, the structural sounds of the ship climbing and the jungle falling away below. She didn't try to get up yet. She gave herself the length of the climb. The ship broke through the cloud layer and the engine tone changed again, and she knew from the sound and the feel that they were in the high atmosphere now, the part where the planet's grip started to loosen, and she sat up. Her leg was an ongoing situation. She could see the brace from here, and she made herself look at it properly for the first time since she'd built it. The bark pieces still held by the paracord but shifted badly, and there was bruising up past the knee that was going to be documented extensively by whoever the ship's medic was. The ankle was swollen. She had lost feeling in 2 toes, which was either the compression or damage she didn't want to calculate right now. She found the compass on the deck 2 feet away, face down. She picked it up, turned it over. The crystal was cracked, a new hairline running across the face from 9 o'clock to about 4. The needle, when she tilted it, still moved, still settled, still landed, as always, 2 degrees off from where it was supposed to point. She held it. Cole was standing over her. She hadn't looked at him yet. She looked at him now. His face was doing something she'd seen it do once before, not in the field, not in a debrief, but once, on a layover at Kethra, when he'd gotten a message she wasn't supposed to see the contents of and she hadn't asked. It was the face of a man who had made a decision that was both correct and wrong at the same time and was holding both of those things without a place to put them. He didn't say sorry again. She was glad. He said, "How?" And she looked at the compass, and she looked at him, and she thought about the ravine and the Cathas and the forward post and the clearing and the 43 seconds she'd sat at the bottom of the world deciding. And she thought about all of it, and she could feel it sitting in her chest like a stone she had carried across 4 kilometers of jungle and had not put down once. She didn't answer yet. The ship kept climbing. Verith 9 was below them now, curving into its dark side, the cloud cover hiding the jungle and the clearing and the ravine and the tracks she'd left in the mud, and all of it going dark as the planet rolled away from its star. She put the compass in her pocket. The ship broke out of the atmosphere into the clear black, and the stars came back, the way they always did, sudden and total and completely indifferent. She was out. She had made it out. Petra came out of the cockpit 11 minutes after they cleared the atmosphere. She was a small, broad woman with close-cut grey-streaked hair and the particular look of someone who had been running extraction flights long enough to have seen most things and stopped performing a reaction to them. She had her med kit in one hand. She set it down next to Nora without a word and started working, cutting the paracord on the brace first, then the bark pieces, and then stopping for a moment when she saw what was underneath. She didn't say anything. She looked at the leg for 4 full seconds in the quiet way of someone cataloguing a list. Then she got to work. Nora let her. She sat with her back against the hull wall and her good leg stretched out and her broken leg in Petra's hands, and she looked at the ceiling and breathed the slow measured way she'd been breathing for 4 kilometers and didn't look at what Petra was doing, because knowing a thing and watching a thing were, again, 2 separate problems. Cole hadn't moved from where he was standing. He was still holding the question, the how, like it was something he'd picked up and couldn't figure out where to set it down. The TAC brace, she said finally. The folding wrist stabilizer in the field kit. That's a wrist brace, Cole said. It is. It's rated for soft tissue. It is. You walked 4 clicks on a compound fracture with a wrist brace and 2 pieces of bark. She looked at him then. And paracord. The paracord was important. Cole sat down on the bench across from her. Not dramatically. Just ran out of standing in him, like the question had been holding him up, and once she'd started answering it, the structural support went. Lou was at the back of the compartment, sitting against the wall, elbows on his knees. He'd said 3 words since she came up the ramp, and all 3 had been her name, and that was enough from Lou. That was actually a lot from Lou. The 2 Vorkai from the squad, Z, and the one called Marin who worked comms, were in the rear section. Marin had not come forward. Z had not gone back. Z had been standing at the bulkhead since they got off the deck, in the specific kind of stillness that she had learned in 2 deployments to read as thinking, not waiting. The Vorkai went still when they were working something out, when a new piece of information was changing the shape of something they thought they already understood. Z had barely moved since she came up the ramp. Petra finished the emergency stabilization and sat back. "You need a surgery bay," she said. "Not a field kit." "I know. I can manage the swelling and get the fragments held until we dock." "I know. Do it." Petra started doing it. Nora looked at the ceiling again. "You want to know the rest of it," she said to Cole. "Not a question. Only if you want to say it." She almost didn't. She was tired in a way that sat behind her eyes and in the back of her knees and in the place behind her sternum that only got heavy like this when she'd been spending from reserves she'd forgotten she had. "There were 2 Cathas at the 1-click mark," she said. The compartment was quiet. I stood still. "Read the field manual on this planet back on the Callaway. They did their assessment and they left." Cole nodded slowly, like a man doing math in real time and not liking the numbers. "The forward post at the 3-click mark." "The brief said it was clear," Cole said. "The brief was wrong." "How many?" 2 sentries. Another pause. "Longer. I walked past them," she said. "They thought I was a stone lizard or something close enough. Bad light. Wrong gate. I used the way I was already moving." She felt Petra pause for just a moment. Then continue. "You used a broken leg gate," Cole said, very carefully, "as camouflage." "It was the gate I had." Cole put his hands on his knees and looked at the floor. Lou said, from the back of the compartment, very quietly, "Lord." Z moved. It was the first significant movement Z had made since they'd gotten off the deck, and it pulled everyone's attention the way movement always does in a still room. Z came away from the bulkhead and stood at the center of the compartment, not close to anyone, just in the space, and looked at Nora for a long moment with the secondary eyelids all the way up. When Z spoke, it was directed at Cole. "I have read your species' medical literature," Z said. The voice was level. Careful in the way the Vorkai were careful when they were saying something they had checked several times before saying it. "The compound fracture she sustained. The classification in your own texts is non-ambulatory. Complete weight-bearing is contraindicated. Field rest is mandatory." Cole didn't answer. She walked 4 clicks on it. Still nothing. In 4 canopy jungle. J'ai post. Past a live forward post, another pause. In under 53 minutes. Z looked at Nora. Nora was looking at the ceiling. "I have been studying human pain thresholds since my first joint deployment," Z said. "I have field data from 7 human operatives across 4 combat zones. I have the full Vorkai medical cross-reference on human physiology and stress response, a pause that was different from the other pauses, shorter, like a breath. I don't have a model that accounts for what she just did." The compartment sat with that. The ship hummed. The stars outside the viewport were doing their indifferent, permanent thing. Petra tied off the last wrap on the stabilization and sat back again. She looked up at Nora and she had the face of a woman who had seen a lot of things come back from places they shouldn't have been able to come back from, and who had made a private professional decision not to stop being surprised by it. "Done," Petra said. "Best I can do until we dock." "Thank you," Nora said. Petra packed up the kit. She stood. She looked at Nora for 1 extra second, not with pity, not with the look people gave you when they'd watched you get hurt, but with something else, something less named and more earned. Then she went back to the cockpit. Cole was still sitting on the bench. He looked like a man who had left something behind and come back to find it had gotten somewhere ahead of him, and he was still working out what that meant. "Cade," he said. "Briggs." "I." "Don't," she said. Not hard. Not angry. Just final, the way you close a door, not because you're done with the room, but because the draft is getting in. He nodded. Lou had gone quiet again. Marin's comms chatter from the back of the ship was a low murmur, the routine post-mission relay checks, the sound of operations continuing the way operations continued, patient and indifferent to what it had just cost. Z sat down on the deck, not the bench, the floor, folding in the way the Vorkai folded, long-limbed and angular and somehow taking up no space at all, and looked at the compass in Nora's hand. "Is that navigation equipment?" Z asked. Nora looked at it. The cracked face. The bent hinge with the old electrical tape. The needle sitting 2 degrees off true. No, she said. Z considered this. Then what is it? She thought about the ravine. She thought about the 43 seconds. She thought about what it felt like to make a decision that the math had already ruled out, to stand up on a leg that couldn't hold her and start moving toward a ship that might not wait, and to do all of it in the greenlit dark of a jungle that didn't know her name and didn't care. She thought about what it was that you held onto when everything else was already spent. Something that still works, she said. Z looked at the compass for another moment. Then at her. Yes, Z said. I see that. The ship moved on through the dark. Verith 9 fell away behind them, the planet shrinking in the viewport, its surface turning to a blue-green curve and then a distant shape and then something you had to look for among the other distant shapes. She leaned her head back against the hull. She was not going to sleep yet. She was going to sit here for a little while longer and let the hum of the engines be what it was, which was the sound of out, the sound of past it, the sound of the specific and undecorated fact of still here. The math had said no. She had said something else. She closed her eyes. The stars kept going.